Look at the room you're in right now. The walls, the ceiling, the air moving in and out of your lungs without you even thinking about it. All of it feels permanent, like this is just how the world is, like it has always been this way. It hasn't. Rewind far enough, and this exact spot, the ground beneath your feet right now, would kill you in under a minute. No oxygen, no solid ground, just an ocean of liquid fire and an orange sky so thick with poison. You wouldn't even have time to understand what was happening. For 99% of this planet's entire history, nothing remotely like you existed. Not humans, not mammals, not even insects. The Earth got along just fine without us for 4.5 billion years. And for almost all of that time, the things running this planet were nothing you would recognize as life at all. So before we get to Cleopatra, before we get to the most powerful woman who ever lived, before we get to the woman that Rome, the Senate, and an entire empire spent decades trying to destroy, you need to understand the world she stepped into, because that world was already ancient when she was born, and it had been trying to kill everything in it for a very, very long time. Egypt, 51 BC. The Nile floods every year, like it has for thousands of years before this moment. The Great Pyramid of Giza is already 1,500 years old. The Sphinx has been staring at the horizon for so long that the desert winds have worn its face almost smooth. And in the royal palace in Alexandria, an 18-year-old girl has just become the ruler of the most powerful empire on Earth. Her name is Cleopatra VII. And almost everything you think you know about her is wrong. Here is the first thing they don't tell you in school. Cleopatra was not Egyptian. Her family, the Ptolemies, were Macedonian Greek. They had ruled Egypt for 250 years. 250 years. And in all that time, not a single one of them had bothered to learn the Egyptian language. Cleopatra did. Not just Egyptian. She spoke 9 languages total: Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, Ethiopian, Parthian. She could walk into any room in the ancient world and speak to whoever was in it without a translator. She studied military strategy, naval tactics, philosophy, economics. She understood how trade routes worked, how grain prices moved, how to negotiate with kings, and how to intimidate generals. While the other royals of her time were being dressed and fed by servants, Cleopatra was preparing for a war that nobody else even knew was coming. The problem was simple. She had a little brother, Ptolemy XIII, 10 years old, and the advisors controlling him had already made their decision. Cleopatra had to go. It happened fast. In a single night, Ptolemy's advisors moved against her. Cleopatra was stripped of the throne she had just inherited, forced out of Alexandria, out of Egypt entirely, exiled into the desert with nothing but loyalty from a small group of soldiers, and whatever she could carry. Most people in that situation would have accepted it, survived, disappeared, waited for history to forget them. Cleopatra started planning her return before the dust had settled. Julius Caesar had arrived in Alexandria. He was 52 years old. He had spent his entire adult life conquering the known world. At that moment, he was the single most powerful human being alive, and Cleopatra needed to get to him. There was one problem. Her brother's guards controlled every road, every gate, every entrance to the royal palace. If she walked in through any of them, she would be arrested, or worse. So she came up with a different approach. She had herself rolled inside a carpet, smuggled past the guards, past the gates, past the soldiers, and unrolled directly at Julius Caesar's feet. Caesar had met kings. He had met emperors and warlords and high priests. He had stood in rooms full of the most powerful people in the ancient world. He had never met anyone like Cleopatra. Within days, they were allies. Within weeks, something more than that. Ptolemy XIII fled the city. He tried to cross the Nile. He drowned. Convenient. Some people thought so at the time, too. Back in Rome, the city was talking. They had names for Cleopatra: witch, sorceress, seductress. They said she had cast some kind of spell over Caesar, that no rational man would behave the way he was behaving, unless he had been enchanted. The Senate watched, and the Senate worried. But the real reason Rome feared Cleopatra had nothing to do with magic. It was simpler than that, and far more dangerous. Egypt under Cleopatra was becoming richer than Rome. Her kingdom controlled the grain supply that fed the entire empire. It controlled the trade routes between Africa, Arabia, and the Mediterranean. The gold, the papyrus, the spices, everything that Rome depended on to function, passed through territory that Cleopatra controlled. Rome needed Egypt. Egypt did not need Rome, and Cleopatra understood that completely. Then, on the Ides of March 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated in the Roman Senate, 23 stab wounds, and Cleopatra's most powerful protector was gone. She returned to Egypt, alone, exposed, with no allies left in Rome. And then came Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted general, Rome's new strongman, the man that half the empire was already looking to as their next leader. Cleopatra understood immediately what this meant, and she played it perfectly. When Antony summoned her to meet him in the city of Tarsus, Cleopatra did not simply arrive. She sailed into the harbor on a golden barge. Purple sails, silver oars, her crew dressed as sea nymphs and cupids, and Cleopatra herself seated at the stern, dressed as the goddess Isis. The entire city of Tarsus came to the waterfront to watch. Every person in the marketplace, every soldier, every merchant. Mark Antony sat alone at his tribunal in the empty marketplace. Every single person had left to see her arrive. He never stood a chance. Octavian was a different kind of enemy entirely. He was not charismatic like Caesar. He was not warm or generous like Antony. He did not fall for grand gestures or golden barges or divine costumes. Octavian was cold, calculating, patient in a way that made him genuinely dangerous. He wanted one thing from Egypt. Egypt. All of it. The grain, the gold, the trade routes, the wealth that Cleopatra had built and protected for 2 decades. But first, he needed Rome to want what he wanted. So he started a different kind of war, a war of words. He told Rome that Antony had lost his mind, that Cleopatra had bewitched him completely, that she had persuaded him to abandon Roman values, Roman gods, Roman identity, that she planned to move the capital of the Roman Empire to Alexandria and rule it herself from the east with Antony as her instrument. Rome believed him. The Senate declared war, not on Antony. He was still a Roman citizen. They declared war on Cleopatra. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Octavian's fleet met the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra at sea. The battle did not last long. Antony's ships were heavier, slower, undermanned. Octavian's admiral had planned for exactly this. Within hours, the battle was over. Antony retreated to Alexandria, convinced that Cleopatra was already dead. He took his own sword. He did not die immediately. He died slowly, in her arms, in the palace they had built together. And Cleopatra, for the first time in her entire life, had absolutely nothing left to negotiate with. Octavian arrived in Alexandria. He had a plan for Cleopatra. He would take her back to Rome in chains, parade her through the streets of the city she had spent her life outmaneuvering. Let the Roman crowd see her humiliated. Let them see what happens to those who try to stand against Rome. Cleopatra understood exactly what was waiting for her. She had spent enough time studying power to know how this worked, and she made her decision. On August 12th, 30 BC, Cleopatra was found dead in her private chamber, dressed in her royal robes, seated as if on a throne. An asp coiled beside her, 2 small puncture marks on her arm. Was it the snake? Was it poison she had prepared in advance? She had spent years studying toxicology. Was it something else entirely? 2,000 years later, historians still argue about it. We still don't know, but we know this. Octavian did not get his parade. Cleopatra chose her ending, on her own terms, in her own time, the exact same way she had made every decision in her entire life. She was 39 years old, so look at the room you're in right now. The walls, the ceiling, the air moving in and out of your lungs. All of it feels permanent. It isn't. Everyone wanted Cleopatra dead. Her own brother, his advisors, the Roman Senate, Julius Caesar's assassins, Octavian and his entire empire. Every single one of them outlived her, but you are not here today thinking about any of their names. You are here thinking about hers. She has been dead for 2,000 years. And she is still the most famous woman in the history of the ancient world. Everyone wanted her dead. No one got to decide how. If you made it this far, you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe. New historical POV every single week. Next, the man who taught every dictator in history how to win. You already know who that is.